All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Hope you enjoyed your lunch today. Welcome to Exchange Server 2013 Tips and Tricks. This is the latest in a long, more than 20-year series of these sessions that I've been doing at various events. And I'm excited to see a really full room here. How many of you are already running Exchange 2013? Just a few of you. So we're really going to focus on tips and stuff just for Exchange 2013. So if you don't have it yet, you might feel maybe a little lost, or maybe you're not getting everything, but try to stick with it because I think some of this will pay off in the end once you are on 2013 and so forth. And if you haven't gotten there yet, and actually the beginning of the session, we'll kind of level set and let you know where we are with the product in terms of our milestones and things like that. All right, so let's start just with the basics. I love those curtain animations. Let's just start with the basics of Exchange 2013. I always like to kind of ramp this session up where we start maybe at a 200 level and go up to 300 and eventually hit 400 at the end. So we're going to start out a little light, and then we're going to get a bit heavier as we go along. So in terms of the basics, obviously we released Exchange 2013 quite some time ago. In fact, it was back on 10/11/12, very easy date to remember. And then since then, we've had some other milestones, such as the product becoming generally available. That's when it hits the price list and you can actually purchase it. There was also service availability. That is when we RTM'd Exchange 2013 in our Exchange Online services. And then since then, we've also released some cumulative updates for Exchange 2013 as well. And the latest that we're on is Cumulative Update 2, second edition, which is build 7.12.24. So for those of you who actually have Exchange 2013, ideally you'll be on this latest cumulative update to get all the goodness that we have in there as well. Now, Exchange 2013 is available in multiple editions, just like it was with Exchange 2010. We have our Standard and Enterprise edition, which is typically what's deployed on premises, and then there's a hybrid edition as well. So let's start with the first two, since if you're deploying on-prem, that's typically what you'll buy. The only difference between the Standard and Enterprise edition is with respect to the number of mounted databases they can support. When we talk about mounted databases, we're talking about active or passive database copies. Active databases are obviously mounted and attached to the information store for user activity, and passive databases are mounted and attached to the replication service for continuous replication, log shipping, and replay. That is the only difference between the two. If you want the greater scalability in terms of number of mailbox databases, then it would be the Enterprise edition that you would use. If you don't need that many databases, or if you've decided to split out your server roles for whatever reason, and you're deploying dedicated CAS servers, then the Standard edition of Exchange will serve you just fine. Now, the Hybrid edition, that is there for customers who want to create a hybrid configuration where they have some of their mailboxes on premises and some of their mailboxes out in the cloud. Now, the Exchange 2013 hybrid server is actually there for legacy on-premises customers. So if you're running Exchange 2007 or Exchange 2010 and you want to establish a hybrid relationship with a Wave 15 tenant in Office 365, then you would be using the Exchange 2013 hybrid server. Otherwise, if you're just going to be a pure Exchange 2013 environment, or 2013 only on-prem and a hybrid environment, then you actually don't need the hybrid edition server. The reason for that is we've now included native hybrid capabilities inside the product. So really the legacy hybrid server, or excuse me, the Exchange 2013 hybrid servers, again, really just there for legacy customers. Now, for those of you who are still on Exchange 2003, you can actually introduce an Exchange 2010 hybrid server, and that server can act as the go-between between your on-premises 2003 organization and Office 365. So if you want to move off of 2003 and you want to go to the cloud or go to a later hybrid version, that would be one of your mechanisms to do that. And that would be installing the 2010 hybrid server, configuring the relationship, purchasing the Office 365 service, and then doing the migration of your mailboxes and so forth. Pretty simple and straightforward. Now, cumulative updates. How many of you are familiar with our cumulative update servicing strategy? All right, just a few of you. So this is different from what we've done in the past. In the past, we've had two different forms of updates. One is called an update rollup, and the other is called a service pack. So it's actually the update rollups, those smaller patching packages that we have done away with. So now what we release periodically are these cumulative updates. And these are more similar to a service pack, except they don't replace service packs. We will still have service packs for Exchange. But a cumulative update is like a service pack because it's the entire product. So for instance, that's one of the reasons it's much larger than a roll-up update. It's roughly the same size as the original product. And just as we did with our servicing model for Exchange 2010 and earlier, you can always just deploy the latest service pack and have the latest bits be on your server. You don't have to deploy RTM and then CU1 and then CU2 on top of that. You download the CU2 package from our download center, and you install that, and you get a fresh install of the latest bits, in this case for CU2. So we make that model quite a bit easier than using your typical rollups. Now, security updates. Those will be issued independently. Okay, so when we have a security update, we are going to release them for each supported CU. So we're not going to force you to upgrade to a specific cumulative update just in order to get a security patch. So for instance, if we're in a period of support for both CU1 and CU2, we will release security updates for CU1 and CU2. We won't make you deploy CU2 just to get a security update. So that's another advantage that we have over the old roll-up update strategy. Now, some of the benefits, some have yet to be realized, but our goal for this is to actually have better testing, better scale validation, and basically overall better validation of the product bits before we ship them to you for on-premises deployment. Those of you who've been keeping track recognize that we have been terrible at that. We've done a really bad job, quite frankly, at getting these updates out without causing some sort of problem and having to recall them and reissue them. So our hopes of deploying in the data center first, in terms of giving you a better on-premises experience, we're still working that kind of stuff out. We did initially say that we were going to deliver these cumulative updates every quarter. That has led some folks to mistakenly believe that we're going to be deploying them every 3 months. That's not true at all. We could deploy the first day on quarter 1 and the last day on quarter 2, and that's effectively a 6-month window right there. So we have said roughly every quarter, but again, given the track record that we've had recently with our updates, we are looking into whether or not we need to revise that and maybe slow down a bit in terms of our release cadence. But stay with us. We will get there. Of course, only time will tell. But we do take these kinds of incidents very seriously, and we do have lots of processes and other things that we're spinning up internally to kind of prevent that stuff from happening in the first place. Now, in terms of cumulative updates, as I mentioned, when you install them, they are the full package. And just like a service pack, when you install them, what they're actually doing is uninstalling the existing product and then installing the new product in its place. That has the side effect of removing basically any custom configurations you may have made in your web.config files and some other places that are preserved as well. Again, that is no different from what we did with Exchange 2010. So those of you who've gone through those experiences hopefully have very good change management, and you'll be able to very easily reintroduce those custom changes that you've made. But keep in mind, many of them will be lost when you deploy one of these CU updates. Now, if during the installation process one of these CU updates fails, you really don't have too much of a worry about that, because there's 2 different ways that you would proceed at that time. The first way is you would go ahead and try to run setup again and see if we can continue from where we left off or continue from where we had the problem. If not, then your backup plan is actually the recover server operation, where you take the bits you were running and run that recovery process. So for instance, if you're on CU1 and you're trying to install CU2 and that has a problem, you would use recover server with the CU1 bits, put your server back the way it was, and then begin the install process again. And the other major difference between a CU and a rollup update is, unlike the rollup updates, which did not increment the version information for your servers, we will do that with a cumulative update. So whether you're using the Exchange Admin Center or whether you're using PowerShell to get the Exchange version information, you will see that server build get updated with the cumulative updates. So at a glance, you'll know exactly what builds of Exchange that you're running inside your environments. There's a lot more to talk about. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it because we've got a blog entry on it, but if you go read that, that'll explain in more detail how we plan on servicing Exchange in the future. All right, let's talk about some general stuff. I'm not going to go through everything on this list, but I wanted to kind of compile a list of critical pieces of Exchange functionality that had been in the product for a long time that are now simply gone from Exchange 2013. Now, the way I typically describe Exchange 2013 is it really is the first version in a new paradigm. Exchange 2010 was really the last version of the old paradigm. And I say that because so much of the significant functionality that we had is gone. So major things like this separate hub transport and unified messaging roles, that legacy CAS role that we had, that's all gone. That's all now existing from a functional standpoint inside the mailbox server. All that stuff is gone. The Exchange Management Console that we've had for a few versions, the graphical UI that some of you may be using today to manage your Exchange infrastructure is gone. No more MMC snapping. The Exchange Control Panel that we introduced in Exchange 2010 is gone, and I'll tell you what the replacement is in a moment. And other significant things. We, in Exchange 2010, we threw away the Outlook web app application that we had in 2007 and wrote a brand new one in 2010. Guess what we did in 2013? We threw away the 2010 one and wrote a brand new one in 2013. So the legacy Outlook web app is also gone, and with it, some of the functionality that we had, like S-MIME and some of the reading pane features that we had. We are trying to bring some of that stuff back. I don't have any dates for you, but we are looking into what we can do to achieve feature parity. But again, that's something that's significant that's gone. Support for Outlook 2003, that's gone. And along with it, support for Outlook connectivity using RPC over TCP. We now no longer allow raw TCP access from an Outlook client into either a client access server or directly to the mailbox server as well. Let's see what other major things are gone. The virus scanning API, the antivirus API or the virus scanning API, the last API that hooked into the information store is gone. And that's actually a great thing. It doesn't mean that you're at greater risk for viruses. What it means is you get greater stability out of your Exchange servers because we don't have any third-party hooks into the store. Only the Exchange application itself can get into the store and do stuff. So you don't have to worry about that. And of course, speaking of the store, store.exe, that's been in Exchange since Exchange 4.0 and all the way through to Exchange 2010 is also gone. Simply doesn't exist. And along with it went the dynamic buffer algorithm. How many of you are familiar with that? This usually is what happens. I ask that question, not a single hand goes up, but watch this. How many of you are familiar with, hey, the store is taking all available memory? There you go, that's right. That's the dynamic buffer algorithm, okay? So we don't have that anymore. We no longer dynamically calculate database cache for your databases. That will have an important change for you, which I'll talk about in a minute. But that stuff is all gone. And actually, again, that's a good thing. That literally, just removing that dynamic buffer algorithm allowed us to literally remove hundreds of thousands of lines of code from the product. And not to mention the legacy store code, which was very, very old, very, very bloated, touched by many, many people over many, many years. And of course, being a monolithic process, was limited in its scalability. So it was time to let that go as well. So lots and stuff is just gone in Exchange and replaced by lots of good stuff. So we talked about the new server role architecture earlier this week, where we now just have the two server roles, the client access and the mailbox server. Again, all the functionality from the previous versions is in the mailbox server, so our client access server is brand new. We completely wrote that from scratch for Exchange 2013. And it really just has three components in it. It's got what we call a cafe, the client access front end. That's a lightweight protocol proxy for HTTP and POP and IMAP. And we've got a front end transport service, which is an SMTP proxy. And then we have a call router, which routes calls to the mailbox role for SIP and unified messaging callers as well. So a brand new server architecture that we're dealing with. The managed store, that replaces the information store. It's called the managed store because, as its name implies, it's written in managed code. But beyond that, we've also broken it out into the worker process model. So the information store service that you know from previous versions is now really nothing more than a lightweight, thin controller service whose only purpose in life is to support the worker processes for the store. Every database in Exchange 2013 has its own worker process associated with it. And that's going to be the Microsoft.exchange.store.worker.exe process. So if you've got 10 databases on your system, you will have 11 processes, the store controller service and one worker process for each of the databases. Now that worker process is there to provide the RPC endpoint for the database and to provide a static database cache. So we now only calculate database cache when you start the store up. What that means, though, from an admin perspective, is if you add databases or remove databases, or if you add or remove database copies to a server, you'll actually need to stop and restart the information store so that it can statically recalculate the cache based on your configuration changes. And we'll actually tell you that if you do these operations in the GUI or the shell, we will pop up a note for you that reminds you that you need to restart the information store so that the cache can be statically calculated again. Now, we've expanded high availability beyond the DAG. We now include technology that is brand new in Exchange 2013 called managed availability. And managed availability is there to basically protect the user experience by, in some cases, pretending to be a user through synthetic transactions, and in other cases, invoking pre-programmed recovery-oriented actions so that it can restore service and restore access to users that may be impacted by it. So managed availability is there to detect problems as soon as they occur or as soon as they're discovered and take some form of corrective action. That corrective action could range from cycling an IIS worker pool to restarting IIS or other services itself, or to failing over one or more databases, or actually to restarting an entire server to account for problems that will otherwise not be correctable. So a common example is whenever we see some sort of storage issue on an Exchange server, more often than not, we actually have to dispatch an operator in Office 365 to go fix that. Operator is what we call an administrator in Office 365. Anytime we have to dispatch an operator to do those kinds of activities, like push the power button to reset the box, that costs us money. And so to save money and to streamline operations, we've taught the system how to do that itself. So we don't need to dispatch an operator. The system is capable of making decisions and taking these kinds of corrective actions on its own. And of course, if it can't fix something, then through event logging, it can go ahead and notify an administrator that something needs their attention. Search Foundation, also brand new. In previous versions of Exchange, 2007 and 2010, we used a variant of Microsoft Search. Microsoft Search is no longer an actively developed search platform inside of Microsoft. But back in 2008, we purchased a company out of Norway called Fast Search and Technologies. And they also had an index, a search index called Fast as well. We bought them, and they are now completely owned by the Office team. We've renamed Fast to be Search Foundation, and it is now the content indexing mechanism that we use in Exchange and SharePoint, and eventually across all of Office as well. So brand new search technology. It does have the downside of requiring some additional resources, namely additional CPU and memory, but you get significantly faster querying and significantly faster indexing as a result of this change, about the order of 35% faster in both cases. So it's well worth the extra resources you need to throw at it. The Exchange Admin Center, that replaces both the Exchange Control Panel and the Exchange Management Console. So now we just have one web-based UI, the Exchange Admin Center, and that is the only graphical management tool that we now ship with Exchange 2013. Of course, we still have PowerShell, but in terms of MMC stampings, that's all gone, and the Exchange Control Panel is gone. Interesting, though, we didn't change ECP that radically on the back end. So there's all sorts of new UI stuff, but to actually access the Exchange Admin Center, you will be going to the ECP virtual directory. So we still have vestiges of that legacy code around in there, but the UI is all new and different. Outlook Web App, that's also brand new for this version as well. Again, we threw away the version that we introduced in 2010, and we wrote a completely new version that is optimized for different screen layouts. And I'll show you later on how you can manipulate the screen layouts. Basically, we are optimized for desktop. Tried to turn it away, sorry. And we're optimized for desktop, we're optimized for tablet, and we're optimized for phone as well. And we make it real easy for you to demonstrate these different views, as I'll show you. You can literally change them on the fly dynamically. Applications in Outlook Web App as well. We are now starting to ship apps with Outlook Web App and apps with Outlook as well. So an example would be like Bing Maps. You have an address and a meeting time and a message. We will recognize that, and we can display a Bing Map showing you where that is and give you directions right inside your email message. So you don't have to go to an external tool. You can just stay right in Outlook Web App or right in Outlook and get the information that way. Let's see what else is important here. Data loss prevention. That is a very significant new feature inside of Exchange 2013. It's built on transport rules, but it is so much more than that. It includes policy templates. It includes policy tips so that you can notify your Outlook 2013 users when they're about to send sensitive or personally identifiable information, or basically any, excuse me, if you can't tell, I have a bit of a cough, basically any sensitive content types that you can think of. So banking information, financial information, passports, driver's license, credit card numbers, personally identifiable information in geographic regions, like, for instance, social security numbers in the US and so forth. All of those kinds of things can be caught and prevented from leaking through your email system using data loss prevention. We also do have fantastic integration with SharePoint and Link as well. So above and beyond that kind of presence information that we sprinkle everywhere. So for example, in SharePoint, we have an e-discovery center that you can use to do e-discovery across your SharePoint websites, across your Exchange mailboxes, across archived link content, which would be stored in the Exchange mailbox, and the file system as well. And that is actually using a federated search API between SharePoint and Exchange. And that is fantastic because it means that SharePoint doesn't need to do the re-indexing itself. They can just go right into the Exchange index, get the information from there, and not have to duplicate indexing efforts. So it's fantastic technology. We've also done things around namespace configuration options as well. So for those of you who are now in a site resilience configuration where you've got multiple data centers, we now give you many more options that we had in Exchange 2010. So you can have options such as using a single worldwide namespace, both excuse me, internally and externally. And you can have, depending on your configuration, data center failovers for your DAG as well. So that means failover between sites without admin intervention, automatic failover. So it's fantastic stuff. All right. Again, way too many new things to drill down because of the time we have. If you go to that URL, it'll give you all the TechNet documentation and all the details about all these wonderful new things that we have in the product. And again, this is really one of the reasons that I described 2013 as the first version in this new paradigm, simply because of all the major and significant changes that we've made. Now, I want to invite you to get connected. I know sometimes you see a list of links, you think it's over. No, we're just still getting started, so don't panic. But I do want to invite you to get connected in the ecosystem, and you can use these links to do that. That could be TechNet forums, where you'll find me and other folks answering Exchange questions, or it could be third-party forums as well. Exchange has a very long history with a thriving ecosystem. And if you're not part of it, then you're actually missing out, because this is your opportunity to mingle with people all over the world who love Exchange as much as you. And they'll be able to give you advice, they'll be able to share their experiences, and it really is a wonderful and close community. So I hope you'll join us if you're not already there. There's also other places and other things that you're going to want to do. There's the Exchange documentation. So yes, we publish on TechNet, but we still do publish periodic compiled HTML help files that you can download and use offline. And in fact, my preference is to use the HTML file because it gives me a better search interface than TechNet. TechNet limits how I can scope stuff, but if I just have that one HTML help file, I can search across the whole thing with one search and get all the topics I'm looking for. We also, at the hub in the Exchange booth, we are giving out Exchange architecture posters. But if you don't get one, you can actually go to that site and download the PDF and take it and print it out yourself if you want as well. It's already set to be printed. All you got to do is take it to your favorite print shop, and they'll set you up with that. There's also some DLP policy updates that we have. You can download those if you're using data loss prevention. You can get additional policy templates that cover different types of sensitive content information. Again, those are free from us. You can also download DLP templates from our partners as well that are producing them. The Office Visio stencils, those have been updated for both the Office 2013 and Exchange 2013. So if you need to do any kind of, excuse me, any kind of diagramming or anything like that, these Visio shapes will help you do that. And then, of course, the UN language packs are separate, and the Exchange Web Services API, for those of you who are doing applications against Exchange, those are also available for download as well. All right, let's talk about PowerShell now. How many of you have actually used PowerShell to manage Exchange? All right, fantastic. So PowerShell obviously is not going away. We've embraced it wholeheartedly in Exchange. And in fact, there are a few things that are gone, but the only things that are gone are related to functionality that no longer exists in the product. So for instance, the commandlets around the new RPC client access object. We don't have that object anymore because we don't allow Outlook to connect via RPC over TCP. So we don't need that object, and because of that, we don't need the namespace that went with it, and we don't need the commandlets that went with it as well. Also, the commandlets around the routing group connector and the team mailboxes, those are all gone as well, simply because those features no longer exist. Now, down at the bottom here, we've got that get logon statistics with an asterisk. That's one of those unusual, strange commandlets that is actually still in the product, but it's what we call deprecated. So if you're not familiar, we typically use two terms to eliminate features from a product. One is deprecated, the other is cut. Cut means the feature's just gone. So for instance, something like the legacy client access server, that's cut. It's just gone as a separate role. But there's other features that get deprecated. Deprecated means it's still in the product, but it's probably going to be gone in the next version. Now, get logon statistics falls into that category. It's still in the product, but it's largely deprecated in part because it no longer returns the same information you're used to, and that's simply a side effect of the architectural changes that we made. Now, that having been said, there have been a few administrators, both in the TAP and some MVPs, who've said that, well, we really like this commandlet and the information that we provide, and they've been giving us business cases to keep this commandlet alive and to get it working the way they hoped it worked. So we do expect to actually remove this commandlet, but if you have a business case where you've been using it and you just need it to do some administrative task, you can email that to me directly, and I will get it to the PM who owns this commandlet. And the more business cases that we get around it, the greater the chances that we'll keep it. Now, what's new? I'm not going to go through every single new commandlet, quite frankly, because there's just too many of them. But I did want to show you the difference in commandlets to show you how things are growing. So we had about maybe 650 commandlets and functions inside of Exchange 2010. In 2013, RTM and CU1, that's about 937, and then we've added some more in CU2, so we're up to about 944 now. There's more coming in CU3 as well, and there will probably be more coming in future updates as well. And of course, as we do this, all these things will get documented, and you'll be able to find out how these new things are working for you. And in terms of documentation, we've actually made another major change in CU2 as well. We now have the ability to separately update the Exchange help. And so what that means is you no longer have to wait for our 30, 60, 90-day localization period for non-English updates to come out. We now have the ability to streamline them through an update commandlet directly into the product for you. So that will be a time savings for those of you who are using UN language packs as well, and using foreign language commandlet help. All right, let's talk about some tools. All right, so I'm going to go through the tools largely in the order in which you would use them. So if you're going to deploy Exchange 2013, one of the first things that you need to do is become aware of our new sizing guidance. Because 2013 is so different from 2010 that you can't use the same calculator, you can't use the same processor baseline, you can't basically use the same formulas to calculate how to size your Exchange servers. So we have a whole new sizing process out there that we want you to use. In addition to that sizing process, there's also a new server role requirements calculator as well. Now, we've changed the name from the mailbox role requirements calendar to the server role requirements calendar because we're also helping you to size CAS as well. So we're sizing both server roles. The other things that we're doing is we're helping you size the network. We're helping you figure out your database layout. We're giving you functionality where you can simulate server and WAN outages so you can see what the load will be before you deploy. And we're also giving you buttons that you can click that will create PowerShell scripts to do your actual deployment. So things like create your DAG and create your databases where they should be and create database copies across the DAG the way the tool thinks they should be. All of that stuff is now built into the calculator. And what that means is after you've used the calculator to do your deployment, then you save that away. It's an Excel spreadsheet, Excel 2013. You save that away, and that becomes your baseline configuration. So if the server dies and needs to be rebuilt, you have all those scripts already, and it will just take you just a few moments to get them up and running and get your servers back the way they are. So it's really fantastic functionality that we have in there. Always use the latest version. We're always doing more functionality and bug fixes in them. So 5.9 is the latest version today. That would be the one that you wanted to use if you were sizing Exchange today. All right, our Jet Stress tool. How many of you have used this before? All right, so this is also there. We've revamped it for Exchange 2013. It works both in a physical environment, but it can also work in a virtualized environment if you're using Hyper-V or VMware ESX 4.1 or later. And this is something that really is something that we still want administrators to do, even though we've done a lot of work to reduce disk I/O. We still want administrators to validate their storage subsystem prior to going into production. That's what Jet Stress is used for. Okay, the Exchange Deployment Assistant. How many of you have heard of that? Or EX Deploy, as we sometimes call it. This is semi-new for 2013. We did have a version of this in 2010. But of course, we've updated it and revamped it for 2013. And the way it works, it's a website that you go to. And you answer just a couple of questions about your deployment. Are you using Edge? Do you need public folders? Do you have a disjointed or non-standard namespace? Those kinds of things. And after you've just answered a couple questions, it will go ahead and give you step-by-step instructions to do your entire deployment. And not only do you get the steps that tell you exactly how to do things, there's also at the end of each of those topics a section called How Do I Know This Worked? So we also give you steps to validate that the things that you just did are good to go and that they're successful and you're ready to move on. So that's good. It's a secondary level of confirmation above and beyond the confirmation you might get from just using the tools to do those tasks in the first place. This is something where we're always constantly trying to improve it as well. And we do have scenarios for you to deploy if you're coming from 2007 or 2010, or if you want to do a new deployment, or if you want to do a hybrid deployment. All of that is covered now in this one web-based tool. It also has the ability to print out instructions in PDF or send them in email. So if you do need to deploy on a disconnected network, you can gather all that information and then go offline with it and start doing your deployments that way. Now, the Remote Connectivity Analyzer. How many of you have heard of that? Great. This is another fantastic tool that we have freely available for you. Initially, it started out as just a web-based tool only, hosted in a Microsoft data center. But now we also have a downloadable version of it called the Microsoft Connectivity Analyzer that you can download, run internally, and basically verify connectivity from both inside and outside the organization. So it's a fantastic tool for verifying Outlook Anywhere, for verifying Auto-Discover, inbound and outbound SMTP, single sign-on with Office 365. There's also things that we can do for Link and OCS in there as well. And then there's new functionality that we've added recently. One is a message header analyzer that's in there, and that's also something that can be downloaded separately, as I'll show you in a minute. And then there's a mail flow tool that we just released in beta as well. So this is a very full-featured tool from an admin's perspective, and it largely replaces a lot of the test commandlets that you would use prior to Exchange 2013. Now, the message analyzer, if you just want that functionality, you can download it separately. It's currently in beta format, so you'd get that from our Connect website. And the way this works is you take your SMTP headers and you copy them from the message and paste them into the tool, and it instantly does analysis of each of the hops. Shows you what each hop was, how long the message took along each hop, and basically breaks down the entire flow of the message for you like that. So it's another wonderful tool when you're doing things like troubleshooting why a message took so long on one transport server versus another. Now there's this Office connectivity tool that we have out there. Now it says it's for Office 365, but guess what? You can use it for on-premises purposes as well. So some of the more common things that we have around Outlook are like, excuse me. My goodness. Are like Outlook not, excuse me for a second. Outlook not being able to connect, or Outlook repeatedly prompting for credentials. How many of you have seen that? Yep, it's a very common one. Now, this isn't going to solve it for you in every single case. In the Outlook repeatedly prompting for credentials, there could be dozens of cause for that. But what the tool will do is it will walk you through all the same things that a support person would walk you through if you call this up on the phone and ask for support. So use this tool first, because once you eliminate all of the fixed activities that the tool can present for you, if that doesn't resolve your problem, then you can call support, tell them you've tried everything in this tool, and then they can get that escalated to do some deeper troubleshooting and analysis for you. But most of the easy things are going to be caught by this tool, and it's going to be able to help you resolve those kinds of things. Now, there's also the Exchange 2013 Management Pack. How many of you are using System Center today? Okay, just a few of you. And how many of you are using it with the Management Pack? Just even fewer, less. So we do have the Management Pack available if you're using System Center. But we've changed the way that we do monitoring in Exchange 2013. In 2013, we're relying largely on managed availability to monitor things and fix things for us. So our usage of the Management Pack is really limited just to those escalations that managed availability can't fix. Basically, the Management Pack and System Center become your alerting portal, not your monitoring infrastructure. Okay, so that's not just a big difference technologically, but it's also a very big difference from a mindset change as well. We don't want to do monitoring external to Exchange. We only want to do the monitoring around what's happening with the user experience inside of Exchange. And so that's what we're doing now. We do have the health status that we will transmit to System Center, and System Center can give you a pretty good dashboard showing you both organization and server health. But that's the extent to which we use it now. All the monitoring that we have in 2013 is now all internally done. All right, the Office Configuration Analyzer tool. This actually replaces the Outlook Configuration Analyzer tool. So OCAT is gone and replaced by OFFCAT. So it's doing a lot of the same things. Basically what we're doing here is we're looking for common configuration problems that exist, say for instance in an Outlook profile, with Word, with Access, and with some of the other apps that we have up here. And if the tool finds those problems, it will go ahead and fix them for you. So you don't have to repair a profile. You don't have to repair Office to get Office working properly. The tool will go ahead and just fix that stuff right up for you once it finds those common configuration problems. All right, and then there's the product line architecture. How many of you use Microsoft Consulting Services? Anyone large enough for that? All right. So if you want the fastest way to deploy an Exchange 2013 on-premises enterprise deployment in your organization that adheres to all of the Exchange team's best practices for that deployment, then the product line architecture from MCS could be for you. Now, it's not for everybody. You do need an MCS engagement. But if you do have an MCS engagement, we'll come to you with a reference architecture. And it'll be an architecture that, as I said, meets our best practices, meets the best practices set forth by the Exchange team. And from there, of course, you have the ability to override things. So if you've got exceptions to our best practices that, for whatever reason, you simply can't adhere to, we can make exceptions in there as well. But it is a starting point for the conversation. It is where we come to you and we say, here's a topology. this is our best practice topology. Let's tailor it to meet your organization's specific needs. So that's what we're talking about. But again, you do need an MCS engagement for that. But if you had one, I wanted you to be aware of the PLA because, again, it's going to be your fastest and smoothest way to get a best practice deployment. Now, guess what's back? The best practices analyzer. So right now, it says Office 365 Best Practices Analyzer, but that's just the name that we have for it. It can be used for both Office 365 and on-premises stuff. Now, right now, it's in beta. So it's not the fully final RTM product. We're just sort of testing it out now. You do need either an Office 365 account or an Azure AD account to be able to download the tool. But if you have one of those, you can go and get it, and you can see what the next generation of XBPA is going to look like. And I would strongly encourage you to do that. Unfortunately, if you don't have such an account, we're not quite ready to distribute it to you just yet. Eventually, it will be available for everyone, and including on-premises folks. But right now, we do need a cloud-based account for you to be able to download and start using this tool. And I would really invite all of you who do have access to this tool to not only try it out, but to also give us feedback as well. Because as we're developing it, if there's things that you want in the tool or things that don't work the way you expect, we want to know about that so we can fix it up in the final release or future releases. All right, that's it for tools. Now let's talk, excuse me, my goodness. Let's talk a little bit about my drinking some more water or orange juice. IW and calendaring. Really sorry for all this. I caught something this week and it just won't let go. All right, IW and calendaring. I mentioned that we now dynamically choose the view for Outlook Web App on the fly based on our detection of what kind of device that you're running on. So we have these three views. We've got the traditional desktop view. That'll be the default view that you get when you fire up OWA. But then there's also a tablet view and a phone view as well. And what you can actually do is you see that question mark layout equals T narrow or T wide. Once you've authenticated to OWA, you can go to the address bar and manipulate the URL to add that question mark, the word layout, and then the equals either T narrow or T wide, and we will dynamically switch between those views for you. You don't have to re-authenticate, you don't have to close and reopen. We'll just do that on the fly. So if you want to see or demonstrate the difference between these views, you can do that now very quickly and easily. The primary difference has to do with the screen real estate and the amount of space we have between icons from a touch perspective. So if you're on a tablet view, for example, we're optimized for touch. If you're on the phone view, we're optimized for your screen real estate and so forth. But again, you can simply change those layouts on the fly to show people what they would look like without having to actually use their device. Now, calendaring. We've done a tremendous amount of work in shoring up our calendaring logging and our calendaring diagnostics. And we do this in part because of the large number of employee-owned devices that are coming into enterprises these days and hooking up to Exchange and, of course, manipulating calendar items with them as well. And we found that not all devices will actually manipulate these calendar items in the same exact way. Some do different things from others. Even though they may be fully supporting our, for example, our active sync protocol for access, sometimes these devices do kind of funny things with it. So we, excuse me, completely revamped the way that we do logging. We are logging basically almost everything about calendar items now, and the logging is particularly helpful from a diagnostic standpoint. So there are actual real-world cases where you're going to go to these logs and figure things out. So as an example, an executive shows up at a meeting, and they're the only ones there. Okay, and that's really bad. You don't want that to happen. The execs typically get mad when they have a meeting on their calendar, they make that meeting, and absolutely no one else is there. That's a terrible thing to be in. So they complain to you as the administrator, hey, I had this meeting on my calendar, turns out no one else had it, what's going on? So what you do is you go back to the original meeting organizer and you collect calendar logs from them and then one other attendee, not the executive who was affected, but you get them from one other attendee. And once you have these calendar logs, you can use them to generate what we call a timeline. And that timeline literally breaks down all of the activity on those calendar items and shows you who did what, when, and where. And in parsing these logs and building this timeline, what you actually find is that this executive manipulated a meeting series with their device, and in doing so, basically changed the meeting series, removed it from everyone else's calendar, but kept it on their own. And that's using these logs, we were able to determine that. This is actually from a real-world support case that we had. So the calendar logs show us, without a doubt, the reason the exec showed up to a meeting with no one else is because the exec did something to that meeting that took it off everyone else's calendar. And the logs clearly show us that, so it's fantastic diagnostics to have. All right, search, discovery, and compliance. How many of you are interested in the discovery and e-compliance features that we have? All right, great. So in terms of search, I mentioned already. Thank goodness. Is there a doctor in the audience? Just kidding. If there is, you probably want to stay away, because I'm really sick, apparently. Okay, in terms of search, I already mentioned the fact that we have Search Foundation built into the product. And Search Foundation actually includes most of these search filters that you need for content indexing in Exchange. But we have this other set of filters called the Office Filter Pack. And the Office Filter Pack really just provides you with two things over Search Foundation, or I should say in addition to Search Foundation. And that is support for OneNote and Publisher files being indexed as they go through transport. If you need that functionality, install the Office Filter Pack. If you don't need that functionality, you can safely skip the Office Filter Pack. Be aware, though, if you skip the Office Filter Pack, Exchange Setup does have that listed as a prerequisite. But it's not a hard blocking prereq. We'll generate a warning, not an error, if it's not present. Errors, setup blocks you. Warnings, setup saying, hey, be aware of this thing, but we'll continue. So, because setup requires it, we have to also document it as part of the system requirements. So that's why you see it in the documentation. That's why setup issues a warning. But it's a warning that you can safely ignore if you just need the functionality from Search Foundation, which is in the box by default. If you need these other two iFilters, then you would go ahead and install the Office Filter Pack first. And then, of course, we do support third-party iFilters as well. So if you need to go get a document iFilter from someone like Adobe, we can provide you with support for that as well. Now, one thing to be aware of with respect to the processing of messages and attachment through content indexing is there are some limits that we have. So for instance, we limit the maximum number of attachments by default. We'll limit the depth of attachments. So if you had a message within a message within a message, we'll limit our indexing of that and how deep we go. But you can control that behavior. You can go in and change these registry entries and manipulate the settings so that you can have things that are indexed that by default would normally not be indexed because of the constraints that we place on it. So you're free to go in and change any of these registry entries to meet your particular indexing needs. Now, one thing to point out about Search, though, is Search Foundation has an interesting architecture. All of its processes have the same name. They're all called noderunner.exe. But there's a different process for each component in Search Foundation. So one of the components is the administrative interface. That would be the admin node. Another component would be the content portion. So that would be where we're doing content coming in for indexing. Then there's the indexing component, the process that actually does the indexing. And then there's the interactive management system, or the query component, that responds to queries. But when you look at these in Task Manager, they're all just noderunner.exe. And some of them are going to take more memory than others. Some are going to take more CPU than others. And you're going to want to find out and figure out which is which. So the way that you can do that is if you're in Task Manager, you can actually turn on the command line column view for all of your processes. And then when you do that, you'll see the very long and explicit command line that gets executed for that process. And within that long command line, we identify which is which. So for instance, admin node 1 would be part of the command line for the administrative interface. Interaction engine node 1 excuse me, would be there for the querying interface and so forth. So just turn on that column and you'll be able to see what's what. So for instance, if the interaction engine node is running away with CPU and memory, you can tell that someone's doing a very lengthy query as a result of that, because that's the process that supports queries. I'm not going to go through this chart in detail, but I included it because Search Foundation uses a new query language called Keyword Query Language. And if you haven't used that before, I wanted to give you this kind of cheat sheet so that you can see common examples of how you would do searches through the Search Foundation interface. Now, this is different from the types of searches that you would do in Outlook. This is really searching using the server-side search tools as well. But again, here's the language on how you do that. Now, modern public folders. How many of you want to use public folders in Exchange 2013? All right, not too many, but there are some things that you want to be aware of. That architecture has also significantly changed. So for one thing, we don't have public folder databases anymore. All the public folders are now mailbox-based. So public folder databases, public folder replication, geographically dispersed public folders, and multi-master, and the merging of conflicts, all of that stuff is gone. We just have now a single master model where the content lives in one place and only one place, and that's going to be in some mailbox database somewhere in your organization. There are some limitations with modern public folders. For one thing, it's a cutover process from your legacy public folders. And it is a bit difficult to roll back. The reason for that is once you do the cutover migration, all of the new stuff that you're generating now happens in the modern public folders. And so what that means is if you do roll back to the legacy public folders, you have to figure out a way to export that stuff that you've created since then and get it into the old system. If you can't get it into the old system, then you could end up suffering some data loss there as a result of that. So we wouldn't want that to happen to you. So if you need to roll back for whatever reason, it might be worth your while to actually call up for support and have us hold your hand while you do that. Now, here's some quick PowerShell commandlets to show you how to do things with public folders. Again, these are going to be new things that excuse me, you couldn't do in previous versions. So as an example, up at the top here, we want to see if this public folder mailbox has an up-to-date copy of the hierarchy. It's a very simple one-liner to do that. It is wrapped for readability, but you can generally see how to do that there. You can also now list only those public folders that have content in them as well. So if you've got a ridiculously large tree, or there's a lot of depth to it and so forth, you can run a script. It'll tell you which folders have content in it, and then you can go ahead and eliminate the folders that don't have content in it. That's a pretty handy task to have now. There is also a way to move public folder content between mailboxes as well. A couple things to be aware of around that, though, is if you're moving multiple folders, even children folders and parent folders, you still need to specify each and every single folder excuse me, that you want to move explicitly. So up at the top here, you can see that the folder list, I've got folder 1 in quotes with a comma there, and then folder 1/child1 because I want to move both the parent and the child folder at the same time. I can't just put move folder 1 because only that folder would get moved. All the children would stay right where they are if I don't do that. The other thing to keep in mind is I can only have one move going at any given time. So I need to wait for this move to complete before I can move other stuff around as well. So other than that, moving public folder content around is kind of the same as it was in previous versions, except now you've got these commandlets that you need to deal with instead of like a drag and drop. Now, the other thing to be aware of with public folders is around the mail-enabled public folders. So obviously, again, we're going from the legacy public folders to the modern public folders. They cannot coexist. So what you'll do is you'll lock the legacy public folders and then eventually unlock the modern public folders. But during that time, in between the locking and unlocking, there may be messages that come in for those public folders. And what will happen is they'll get stuck in the transport queues because we won't have a place to deliver them. And you can't just go and hit retry or try to push them through. What you actually need to do is wait for that, the unlock to complete, wait for the migration to complete, unlock the modern public folders, and then on every transport server where you have these messages stuck, simply stop and restart the transport service, and that will free them up out of the queue and redirect them to the new modern public folders. And if you look at the message tracking logs, you'll actually see that redirection listed in there as well. Now, if you need to recover a deleted modern public folder, we now have a mechanism for you to do that as well. You simply use the set public folder, you point it to the non-IPM subtree under the dumpster root, you give it the name of the folder that you want to recover, and then you point it to the parent folder in your production environment under which you would want to recover that data. So just like we have deleted item recovery for regular mailboxes, we also have that for public folder mailboxes as well. All right. The last area I want to talk about is managed availability. And I recognize some of this might go over your heads because we really haven't had a session on managed availability this week. And this is all going to be new and different for most of you. But I basically wanted to give you a little information about the basics of managed availability and then show you how to use the commandlets that we have and other PowerShell tools that we have to figure out exactly what managed availability is doing on your system. So the management services for managed availability are all done through the command line. There's no GUI around managed availability. So that would be using things like get health report or get server health or any of the other commandlets that manipulate either managed availability components or the server components themselves that managed availability can monitor and recover from. Get health report is going to be your primary tool for getting server health. You can use get server health as well, but we've put all that functionality also into get health report, so you can just use that one commandlet to get that information out of there. So here's some examples of how you can get the health of your Exchange server. So this is just showing you how to get it for a specific server. This is showing you how to get it for a specific server with a roll-up of all the managed availability groups. This is showing you how you can get things such as health information for an entire database availability group without having to go from server to server to server. You can get the whole DAG just in one commandlet. And then if a server does report that one of its health sets is unhealthy, you can use this commandlet at the bottom to find out more information as to what piece of that health set, what component in that health set is unhealthy. Now, when managed availability does its work, it logs them all into an area of the Windows event log called the Crimson Channel. And most specifically, it's this Microsoft.exchange.managedavailability/recovery actions. We will log everything that managed availability does in that event log from a recovery standpoint. So when it begins a recovery action, we'll log event 500. When it successfully completes a recovery action, we'll log event 501. And if it unsuccessfully completes, we'll log event 502. So as soon as managed availability does something, whatever the outcome is, we will get logging for that. So all those logging actions, you can certainly go into the event viewer and view them yourself, but it might be kind of a bit tedious when you've got lists and lists of events from all different dates and times, and it's a lot easier to kind of parse that stuff through PowerShell. So these are actual commandlets that you can use in your production environments to do those kinds of things. So let me walk you through what I'm doing here. So here we're defining an alias in PowerShell called a $recovery action result events. And we're simply using the getWinEvent commandlet to point it at a specific server name and get all those events from that recovery action results event log. And then what we're doing is we can stick with the native XML format that gets returned to us, but what we found in the service in particular when we need to digest and analyze this information is it's much easier to actually use PowerShell's native format to parse the information and to pipe it out to other places. So that's what we're doing down here. We're defining a second alias, recovery action results XML, and then we're taking the results from the first commandlet and piping it out to an XML area where we can then process that data further. Okay, so now we've got the data inside that XML format, and we want to start processing it. Now that data is based on the recovery action events, and each one of those events is just filled with information, like the server on which recovery is taking place, the name of the managed availability requester that requested the recovery action to take place, and all sorts of other information such as when this happened and where this happened and so forth. So what you can do is you can actually use this to troubleshoot or to investigate what managed availability actually did on your system. So this is showing you a very basic, simple, why did the Exchange replication service restart yesterday? We found that it restarted, and we want to look in the managed availability logs to find out why that happened. So what we're doing is we're taking our recovery action results XML, again, that's the alias that we defined down here in this second commandlet here. And we are looking for, excuse me, the short name of the replication service, which is MS Exchange REPL. And we're looking for a particular start and stop time. So the times right now, it says June 3rd, but just imagine it was actually yesterday instead. And so what we're doing is we're saying we're interrogating the event log, and we just want two pieces of information. We want to know the start time so that we can verify, and we want to know the requester. So when we run this commandlet, this is the output that we get. We can see the time that the recovery action started, and we can see that the recovery action was requested by a requester called Service Health MS Exchange REPL Endpoint Restart. So now we know the name of the responder. The requester and responder, we use those terms interchangeably. So now that we know the name of the responder, we need to figure out what monitor triggered that responder. So to do that, we simply get the responder definitions. Those are also all logged in the event log every time the health service starts up. So when that happens, every single component in managed availability gets identified and listed inside the event log with all of its configuration settings. So we can run another alias called define responders, again, searching through the event log, only in this time we're looking at the responder definition event log. And from there, we can take that and look for that responder that we saw in the other output, again, that Service Health MS Exchange REPL Endpoint Restart. And when we run that commandlet, we see the name of the responder, but we also over here under alert mask, we see now the name of the monitor that triggered that responder. So we're basically working the problem backwards. Now that we know the responder, and now that we know the monitor, the last piece we need to find out is what probe triggered the monitor and what error message that probe encountered that caused it to trigger the monitor. So to figure that out, again, we're going to get the monitor definitions. Just like the responders, we have the monitor definitions all inside the event log. So we're going to parse the event log, get all that from the monitor definition, and we're going to take that and once again parse all of that output and look for that one monitor that has the probe that we're looking for. And that's what this looks like. We can see the names of each of those monitors, and we can see the target resource is that replication service. So now we know what probes were launched. Now that or what probes triggered the monitor, rather, that caused recovery action to take place. So now that we know what those probes are, now we go in again to the event log, we find the probe definitions, and we see what probes meet that specific definition. Now in this case, I want something a little bit richer returned to me than just that raw PowerShell output. So I'm not just getting the information up here with this commandlet, I'm also taking that and piping it out to a graphical grid view of that. And so what I end up with is something that looks like this. I have all the XML nicely parsed out in a grid view. I can go ahead and zoom in, and I can see, for instance, that the task RPC listener check and the other things failed, indicating that the service simply wasn't running at that time because there was no answer when managed availability tried to connect to the replication service. And the replication service is a very important service to have running on all of your mailbox servers, not just your DAG members. It's a required service for all mailbox servers. And so if it's not, excuse me, if it's not responding to connectivity requests from managed availability probes, then that indicates a problem that managed availability needs to solve. And it solves that problem in this case by restarting the service that was not started. All right, one last thing to say about managed availability. A lot of what managed availability does from a transport validation perspective is send SMTP messages as probes to verify that mail flow is proceeding as expected. And this has the unfortunate side effect for those of you using transport journaling of basically filling up your your journaling destination with all of these managed availability probe messages, which you don't want in there. You don't need them. They're internal only stuff, and they don't belong in a journal mailbox. So what you can do is you can create what we call these overrides with managed availability, and that will override what the system does. And in this case, if you create if you use journaling rules, that's one way around it, but the other way is to create either a local override on the server where this is happening, or a global override if you've got multiple servers that you see this on as well. So that KB that we have there will show you how to create the global override and basically stop managed availability from filling up your journal mailboxes with that information. All right, so with that, I am actually 4 minutes over, so I'm sorry about that for Andrew, because I know he's next. But I am happy to take 3 questions, because I've got 3 things to give away here real quick. And so let's start over there. So great. So does the new Exchange Admin Center provide a UI for public folder management? Yes, it does. And you can create public folders there. The one things that you can't do are do some of those commandlets that I showed you before, but if you just need to create them or edit their properties, you can do that inside EAC. Great question. Help yourself to one of these cameras here. Yes, sir. Sure. Are you seeing this in Exchange 2013 only? Are these lab servers or production servers? Okay. If it's a lab server, most likely it's memory constrained. So how much memory do you have on there? It's what? Yeah, and that's why that's happening. Yeah, it's nothing in our code. We just do what we can with the memory that's there, and then that's it. All right, time for one more question. Let's go right here. From 2003 to Office 6? Okay. And sorry, it's hard to hear you. How quickly will what? Okay, and what's the question about them? Oh, from a provisioning standpoint, that depends on how many accounts you have, where your tenant's located, how much data you're pushing up, what else is going on in the service, et cetera, et cetera. There's no real number that I can give you for that because there's too many variables that come into play. All right, I got to get off the stage. That's it for me. Thanks very much for coming.